Lesson 32. We continue reading from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Chapter 2, Sutra 3. The lack of awareness of reality, the sense of egoism or I-amness, attractions and repulsions towards objects, and the strong desire for life are the great afflictions or causes of all miseries in life. In other words, ignorance, egoism, attachment, hatred or anger, and fear of death or fear in general are the Kleshas. There are only 5 Kleshas. All misery that we experience in life can be reduced to one of these 5 issues. And not only that, they're all related to one another. Fear of death sounds very dramatic, but fear is a survival instinct. It's a deep instinct, and it is, in fact, an element that determines almost every person on this earth, their life. Fear, without us being aware of it, most of the time, influences everything we do, everything we say, everything we decide. Almost everything, one way or another, is influenced by fear. It is the reason why we prefer to stay in our comfort zone. Going out of that comfort zone is scary. Scary because of the uncertainty, because of the unknown, because of the exposure. So if we have a choice, instinctively, we choose to stay in that safety zone, that safety bubble, comfort zone. It's normal, it's human. Is this a problem? You would think not. But we are yogis, so we have other thoughts about it. Because fear paralyzes people. It keeps people from doing essential things in life, important things in life. Not cleaning, not cooking, but things that are related to your heart's content. Things that normally require courage. Courage that is in the crown chakra is overshadowed by a huge amount of fear that is much stronger because it is in the bottom, in Muladhara chakra. So if you pay attention, you will see that fear is infused in everything that we do in life. But the tricky part is that we are not aware of it. And so it determines our life. It paralyzes us and keeps us from doing things that are important for our evolution, for our growth process, for our manifestation of our heart's content. It explains why the thing that I mentioned several times throughout this course is that a yogi is on a very dynamic path of change, of growth, of development. It's gradual, but it's significant. And every year that you look back, you see change. After 10 years, you look back, And you see huge change. And it never stops. Now you look at other people, family members, friends, colleagues, and you see that they are not on a dynamic path of development and growth. If you compare them 10 years later with how they were before, most of the times what you see is somebody who just got older. They may have made some superficial progress in terms of promotion. Maybe they made promotion at work. They earn a little bit more money than before. Maybe they bought a house or they bought a bigger house than before. So superficial developments. But in terms of the person they are, in terms of their character, they haven't really evolved. And what they have evolved is very marginal. Why? Because their lives is dominated by fear. They will only come out of their comfort zone if there is no other option, no other choice. And for the rest, they just stay in their comfort zone as much and as long as possible. Don't get me wrong, it's human. We all try to create such a safe environment for ourselves and our loved ones. But as a yogi, because you function in the crown chakra, you overrule fear. That is a quality that we have. But in the beginning, when you do not know how to deal with it, we're going to explain how it really works. Fear is in fact the final station, the end station. People are not born in fear. But we go through the stages that start with ignorance. Then you have egoism. Then you have attachment, followed by hatred, ending in the final stage of fear, debilitating, paralyzing fear. And they occur in that order. And very interesting is that yoga does the suggestion that you can reverse that process in reverse order. And you start by getting out of fear, by going back to the previous one. And that is why the handout contains the example of a sergeant in the army. The sergeant in the army, the bully sergeant, the drill sergeant, is a person who trains new soldiers. People who are not conditioned to function in war, with bullets flying, bombs exploding with huge, devastating noise, and people left and right, your comrades, your friends, dying. A normal person cannot handle such situations. A normal person cannot function anymore in such a situation. A normal person would run away. But you cannot win a war with soldiers who run away. That is why every army camp, every army training institution has drill sergeants who, on the surface, if you don't understand what they're really doing, seem evil persons that have pleasure humiliating the new recruits, bullying the new recruits. What he's really doing is he teaches them to overcome fear by getting angry. And he sacrifices himself for that role, because everybody hates the bully sergeant. Because he humiliates everybody. He taunts everybody, diminishes everybody by piling criticism upon the new recruits. There are many movies about this issue, where at the beginning of the movie you see a bus, like a school bus, coming into the training camp, and you see all these young guys coming out of the bus with their own identities, their own fashion, clothes, music, hairstyle. And they are all they're full of brawn. They have a big mouth, they're full of, they feel like tough guys and what have you. But the drill sergeant knows that they have no qualities whatsoever, in spite of their attitude. So, all their hairs have to be shaven, they have to hand in their personal clothes, and all have to say they wear a uniform, and the training starts. And training consists, for example, out of an obstacle course, where they have to do very difficult and scary things, and they often fail, or they freeze because of fear. And the drill sergeant then steps forward, not trying to encourage them with sweet words, because he knows it doesn't work. They're paralyzed with fear. Only anger can get them out of that paralysis. So instead of using sweet words of encouragement, which he knows doesn't work, he calls them a bunch of weaklings, pussies, up to no good. You better go home and wash dishes or something, or go hang out in bars. You don't belong here. He tries to make them feel stupid and weak and what have you. And there are recruits that can't handle it. It's a selection process. Those will never be good soldiers anyway, so they will be kicked out. The ones that get angry and say, "What? You calling me a pussy? I'll show you something." And they climb and they scale the obstacle course with a fury, with an anger, and they succeed. They succeed in something that they couldn't do because they were paralyzed by fear. That's exactly the purpose of the bully sergeant scolding and humiliating the recruits. Now, what does this have to do with yoga? It works the same with us. You may have already applied this in your life without actually understanding that you were reversing the Kleshas from back to front. When you are in a situation that you are being challenged and you have to do something and you freeze out of fear. Now, many people, when they freeze out of fear, they will simply give up and walk away from the challenge. But sometimes either you can't avoid it, or it is in your personality. That you have this quality that you say, "What? I'm not going to accept this. I'm going to do this. I don't care." And you kind of like the bully sergeant, you go into a conversation with yourself where you kind of diminish yourself, where you kind of scold yourself. So you get angry, you put your foot down and you say, "Do 두고 봐 in Korean. I'll show you something. It's a quality that some people have, and those who don't have it, they need somebody like the bully sergeant to push them over the edge, to trigger that anger so that they will overcome their fear. And for soldiers, that is hugely, hugely important. Soldiers should not run away when the bullets start to fly and the bombs start to explode and the comrades start to drop dead. Then the battle is lost if they run away. They have to stay focused. And they overrule their fear with anger. And that is how the bully sergeant turns unruly youth, young men, teenagers, into well-oiled fighting machines. So that is why this story is here included. It doesn't become so clear from the handout, but I think the principle is clear. So as a yogi, anger or hatred is not a good sentiment if it happens as an emotion. But when you use it as a tool, it is a whole other story. Because it can help you actually achieve things other people can't achieve. And you yourself, in normal circumstances, also would not be able to achieve. But now you manipulate yourself by confronting your fear with anger. Starting from page 3 at the bottom, you see actually the process that you go through all the way back to the first klesha, ignorance. In the last paragraph on page 3, you see the first step in the process is confrontation. The confrontation with the bully sergeant, or with yourself if you can manage to replace fear through the use of anger. So confrontation. The second step in the process, because hatred or anger in itself is not a good emotion, is not a good sentiment. So you cannot stop there. The next step in the process is sympathy. So when the recruit performs well, has overcome the obstacle course by overcoming fear, and starts receiving badges of honor and medals and what have you for their achievements, their performance. Sympathy starts to grow. In the beginning, the recruit hates the bully sergeant because he doesn't see that the bully sergeant is actually helping with their rudeness. But then the recruit starts to notice that actually they are growing. They're getting better. They're becoming more courageous. They're becoming stronger. And then a bond starts to grow between the recruit and the sergeant. Sympathy. A soldier should, of course, not be dependent on the sergeant. They should not become attached to the sergeant. So to stay in that sentiment is also not a good thing, because the soldier needs to become a solitary or an independently functioning entity that can make their own decisions rather than looking at the sergeant all the time. So then There is ego. You revert back to egoism, and you do that by telling the recruit, you've done a good job. You have passed all those difficult tests. You're a man now. You slap him on the shoulders and possibly give them a red beret or a green beret or whatever the commandos, the Marines receive after they have completed their training. And you give them a sense of self-worth. You appeal to ego. After that comes the process of rationalizing. And in the final step, through the rationalizing, avidya, which is ignorance, becomes vidya, knowledge. So avidya is the opposite of vidya. Vidya is wisdom. Avidya is lack of wisdom, ignorance we call it. This is a process that you go through in life time and time again. So it's not a one-time thing. Because we are ignorant, we go through that process of attachment, repulsion, egoism, and finally ending up in a condition of fear, being paralyzed. We resolve that issue by using anger to come out of that fear and then going back. And the last step of that process of reversing is that you develop insight in what you are, basically what you are facing. So ignorance or lack of knowledge led to that downsliding path ending in fear. Reversing that, taking control and reversing that, turns ignorance into insight. But life is not simple. You have solved one thing here, but there are many other issues in life of which we are ignorant. That is why we make mistakes and we keep making mistakes. That is why we may have solved an issue that we were unable to deal with out of fear because we got stuck in fear. We have solved that issue. But then there is another issue presenting itself of which you have no experience yet, that leads you to the same path downwards, from all the way from ignorance to ending in fear. The good news is, however, that because you do this consciously, you become more and more skillful at it. First of all, to recognize what is happening. Because most people just don't realize, because it's just part of human functioning. That is why people get stuck in fear and never get out of it anymore. You learn to reverse that process. You take control in the first instance by using anger to get out of the paralyzing fear. And the rest is often a consequence of that. It leads eventually to you developing insight of the issue that you are dealing with. But practice makes perfect. It really does. So next time, you will recognize the situation sooner. And not only that, you become more skillful at implementing the steps you need to take to reverse it back. And in the beginning, you have to work for it. You have to think about it. But it becomes second nature. It's something that integrates into your daily life, in the way that you function, in the way that you deal with situations where that is applicable. In the beginning, you have to do it consciously, but as time passes and you develop more experience, you have more experience dealing with it, it becomes more and more natural. more and more intuitive. And I can compare it again with learning how to drive a car, which in the beginning is very complex, distracting, scary also. There are so many things you need to do with your hands and your feet, and at the same time, not having only your eyes on the road ahead of you, but also on both sides, left and right, and behind you through the mirrors. In the beginning, that's very overwhelming. But as you continue practicing driving, you don't even notice anymore what your hands and feet are doing. And very naturally, you glance at the left side mirror, the right side mirror, the interior mirror. You naturally, and you don't even know that you're doing it anymore. And the same way with this process of reversing the kleshas, it becomes, like with driving, it becomes intuitive. It becomes something that you do without actually having to consciously start it. So if you read about this in this way, it seems very theoretical, but it's first of all, it's a very dynamic process, and second, it is in the beginning something that you need to do effort for, that you need to consciously decide to actually go through that process. But as you get more and more skillful, more and more experienced, it becomes a natural occurrence. It integrates with how you function in daily life. Sutra 4. Avidya is the source of those that are mentioned after it, whether they are in the dormant, attenuated, alternating, or expanded condition. In the Dutch version of Patanjali's sutras, avidya is translated into Dutch, which in English would say ignorance about reality. So ignorance about reality is the source of those that are mentioned after it. What are we talking about here? Ignorance about reality is the first klesha. The ones that are mentioned after it, that's egoism, attachment, hatred, and fear of death. So what Patanjali is saying here in a very indirect way is all the kleshas originate from ignorance. It is ignorance that leads to egoism, attachment, hatred or anger, and fear. Whether they are in the dormant, attenuated, alternating, or expanded condition. Now, what is that supposed to mean? It has a meaning because nothing is just said for no reason, with no reason. Everything has a very deep and practical meaning. What does that mean? We talked about the kleshas at the beginning of the previous session, and I explained that it starts with the samskara. That is dormant. The memory is there, but you're not thinking about it. And at that very moment, it is not influencing how you act. So it's dormant. Attenuated is where the samskara is triggered, leading to a vritti that then ends up attracting misery, but attenuated, we learned when we practice yoga, as a result of the process that we are in, we actually reduce misery. That is attenuated. Then you have the manifesting state, alternating, and the expanded condition, where you have the full-blown manifestation, where you find yourself in conflict, in pure misery. Now, we had the example of recruits that are being drafted into the army, need to undergo training so that they basically become qualified warriors, people who are able to overcome their fear in battle. But there are many other situations you could apply this to, and maybe more practically understandable, because I don't think you have been in the army. Maybe June? But every love relationship follows this pattern. You fall in love. Love is wonderful, isn't it? Many people will say, is it really? Because the last time I ended up in real misery. Why? Because you fall in love, ego is activated. And because ego is activated, you start looking at yourself in a more heightened sense of self-awareness in relation to the relationship, the person that you fell in love with. Now, attachment occurs. Attachment to the person that you have fallen in love with. What happens next? You become suspicious. You are my love. I want to know where you are all the time. Where were you last night? I tried to call you and you didn't answer the phone. I sent you a message and it took you 20 minutes to reply. Who were you meeting? Where were you? We talked about unconditional love, but ignorance leads to this, and we have all experienced this, right? Then you get frustrated because people get stuck in a relationship. You get frustrated, so anger. But then you realize that ending the relationship, that's scary. You're not satisfied, you're frustrated, you don't trust your partner, even though there is actually no reason, but that is just human nature. But ending the relationship is also not an option because scary. Because it means you have to go on alone. You have to live without that person because you become dependent on each other. You become attached. So people end up getting in relationships, people end up getting stuck in the last klesha. And they stay there. Many relationships are such that basically both partners are in the final stage, but they stay together because that's human nature. It's their, maybe ironically, it is their comfort zone, their safety bubble. The relationship becomes the safety bubble, even though there is so much dissatisfaction, conflict, even anger towards each other, hatred, but we stay together out of fear. And we do that for the rest of our lives, often. Reverse that. Get out of that fear. But very important, especially where it comes to relationships, of course, is unconditional love. Stop with that distrust. If the relationship is meant to be, your partner will not cheat on you. Your partner will not do things that go against the importance of the relationship. And if it is, then that relationship is not meant to be in the end. Unconditional love means to trust completely. not easy, and it has to come from both sides. Because if one partner is capable of unconditional love and the other is not, it often becomes an abusive relationship where one partner thinks that they can do anything they want, they can afford anything they want, because you are unconditional. So that is of course not how it works. Can you see the pattern? Out of ignorance, we end up in egoism, self-centered, leading to attachment. Frustration occurs, anger, hatred, and in the end, we get stuck. Not only relationships, also at work. If you have a contract, if you're not a freelancer, you have a contract, it's the same as with a relationship. You become comfortable in the workplace because you get a fixed salary. Not only that, promotions on a regular basis. If you stay there, if you keep working there. So many people go to work every morning. You can see them in the street, in the subway, in the bus, with a long face. They're not happy. They actually don't want to go there. But they go 5 days a week. And they spend the biggest part of their day actually in a place where they don't really want to be. Out of fear, they don't dare to break the contract and do something that they like to do or go to a place where they want to be. Very understandable, of course, because the society that we live in, money buys us what we need. It pays the rent, it pays the bills, it allows us to eat nice foods and sometimes have fun, go to the movies or on a vacation, on a trip. And when you have a contract, you have some security that every month there will be another salary in your bank account. And that is not something to underestimate. I'm not saying that you should quit your job. But many people are in that stage where they hate their job, they're angry at their managers, their bosses, but they're stuck. Out of fear, they cannot move. Most people are, I dare say. How do you deal with that? You don't quit your job. Don't do that. At least not tomorrow. Try to see the job, and you can do this with a relationship too. Try to see the bigger picture of the job and the relationship that you are in. Because everything is a process. Especially as a yogi, you are a process. And being in a wrong relationship teaches you many things. And being in the wrong relationship can also mean a bridge towards the next step in life. And that can be with that partner, because that partner may also be on a path of growth and learning and change. And same with your job. I've had jobs that most people do not want to do. Cleaning toilets, washing dishes, driving a taxi. But I was happy in those jobs. I was in higher spirits in those jobs. Why? Because they served a purpose. It was part of the process that I was in that would lead to me fulfilling my dream. And that is how you have to look, or how you can deal with issues that you don't like, or places where you don't want to be. Remember that when you do things that you like, that you are enthusiastic about, passionate about, energy is up, literally. But when you do things that you dislike, things that you are ordered to do that you hate, or like daily chores that many people just don't like vacuum cleaning or washing dishes or cooking. And if you do things that you don't like, that you hate, really energy crashes, it goes down. So we learn in yoga to focus on things that lift our spirit. And that automatically means avoiding things that make your energy crash. That seems to imply that you should not wash dishes anymore, clean the house anymore, and you know, all the responsibilities and duties that we have, which are a big part of our life, including work, by the way, often. How do you deal with that? Find purpose in what you are doing. See that it is part of a process, that these chores that on the surface you don't like are in fact an important tool, an important part to get you where you want to be, further down the line. And that is how you can clean 100 toilets per day in an old people's retirement home or at the airport. Or you can wash 150 dishes in a restaurant, and forks and spoons and knives and what have you. An endless stream. That is how you can do things that most people refuse to do. You can be happy even with that. It sounds weird, but if you understand technically how it works, it makes perfect sense. So that is also how you deal with work, but also with an abusive relationship, for example. Situations where you would do more damage if you would immediately try to change it. Then if you try to transform it, basically, take control of your mind processes and try to canalize it towards a positive and a constructive purpose. And then start planning. Step by step, gradually, start planning. And the universe will help you. When the time is right, they will present you with an opportunity. They will guide you in ways. And if you can trust that, which is basically surrender to God or the Most High, if you can do that, you will see that at the right time, the right thing will happen, will present itself in a natural way, without too much effort. I have lived my life like this for the past 25 years or so. And it gets easier and easier. And I'm almost starting to sound like a priest, preaching some religion. Because that's what it almost sounds like. But it's undeniable that it works like that. We make life unnecessarily difficult because we have no patience and because we always resist. So we try to row upstream rather than to go with the flow. That is human nature. In yoga we learn otherwise. Not easy, but it becomes easier over time. Because not only practice makes perfect, but it becomes undeniable that it actually works much better that way. And unfortunately, we learned through pain, so we have to simply bump our heads into concrete walls because of our stubbornness. Questions? I think we have one more sutra. Sutra 5. Avidya is taking the non-eternal for the eternal, the impure for the pure, evil for good, and non-Atman for Atman, respectively. Avidya is ignorance, the source of all the Kleshas. Taking the non-eternal for the eternal. We do this all the time in life. When you are born, you open your eyes and you look at your mom and dad. And you say, that's mom and dad. You look at your grandparents and you say, that's grandma and granddad, grandpa. And you look at your siblings and they are your siblings. What am I getting at here is that you don't realize that things change until your mom one day says to grandmom, hey mom, and you're confused as a child. She said mom to my grandmom. How does that work? She's grandmom. She's not mom, she's grandma. Then grandmom calls your mom by her name. And your aunt and your uncle. And you scratch your head and you say, no, that's mom. How can you call her some name? Then your mom explains, your uncle, that's my brother. Ah, now you're getting dizzy. Your brother? You do not realize as a child that your mom 40 years ago was a child like you. You do not realize that grandma and granddad are in fact the mom and dad of your mom. Or your dad. You do not realize as a child that one day you will be mom or dad, or even later, grandma or granddad. Now, this sounds very simple or simplified, but there are many things that we look at in the same kind of way. Like we buy a house. And we think that the house will be forever. But that house will slowly deteriorate if we don't do maintenance. We turn on the tap and we have water coming out of the faucet, basically from a hole in the wall. And we do that every day without even thinking about the possibility that tomorrow you wake up and there is no water coming out of the wall. You think it will be forever. But then something happens. The pump station has a failure, or war breaks out. War devastates everything, especially the infrastructure of a country, of a society, of a city falls apart. There are no trucks anymore bringing food to the supermarkets. You go every day to the supermarket and you get everything you want and like. And you think it will always be so, until the shelves are empty in the supermarket. And then you have a big problem. Electricity. We all take it for granted. Peace. You know, sometimes I say something about military. And people don't like that because the world would be a better place without military. That's not true. If there were no military, people think if there were no military, there would not be war. It doesn't work like that. If there is no military, there are countries that use their military in a responsible way. It's yoga on a world level. It is the militaries that are functioning in a responsible way that basically keep the balance in the world. Like NATO, which is a gathering of countries that have decided to do effort to not let war happen anymore. If that wouldn't exist, the world would be chaos. We would not have peace anymore. We would not be safe anymore. Not here in Korea, not in the Netherlands, not in the United States or in China. It would be chaos. It would be war everywhere, like there was war everywhere just a couple of 100 years ago. Or actually, until the end of the Second World War, there was always war, especially in Europe, but everywhere, basically everywhere. And it is after the Second World War that people joined hands and said, let's do effort not to let this happen anymore. And there are still wars, for sure. Ethiopia is a new crisis area. Yemen, Syria still is not good. But it's totally different from 100 years ago or 500 years ago. We take things for granted, and peace may be one of the biggest undervalued things that we enjoy. It is peace, which is sattva, that allows us to grow and to thrive. Without peace, we would every day be struggling for just a little bit of food or even safety. You don't even know whether you're going to live tomorrow. You might get killed. It's one of the biggest undervalued, especially living in a country like Korea, civilized country, Europe, other countries that have been stable and free from war for decades. The newest generation who have never experienced war, which includes all of us, I think, we don't realize how easy it all can go wrong again. Taking the non-eternal for eternal. Taking the impure for pure. We learned about purity, saucha, which is about purity of motive. Now, just watch the news, especially when it is about politics, and you see many people, politicians, justifying the unjustifiable. They try to make you believe that what they say and what they do is based on pure motive. While if you look closely, you see that it is purely self-interest. Politicians seem to represent the people, but what they're really interested in is that you vote for them again. They will say whatever, blatant lies, to make you vote for them again. And without a blink of an eye, they lie and they deceive. And they justify it saying, yeah, but it's based on pure motive. I'm sincere and honest. But we have this inner voice in our head that does the same thing all the time, trying to find excuses. If we look deep inside our heart, we know that it's not good. We know that it's not right. We know that it's not pure. But subconsciously, there is this little voice inside our head that justifies the unjustifiable. Of course, as a yogi, you become increasingly aware of that voice whispering in your ear. And when it happens, you smile and you say, it's not going to happen. You're bullshitting me. Not going to happen. But most people don't have that consciousness. Remember, this is all starting with avidya, lack of consciousness, lack of knowledge. Then we have taking the evil for good. There are many examples. Hitler was worshipped by many people in Europe, not only Germany, and many people in Europe. And he ended up being one of the most evil leaders in a long time. But there are people in history that are still being worshipped as heroes that have committed crimes against humanity on the same scale as Hitler has done. And we hardly ever talk about it. Alexander the Great. In Macedonia, they have a huge statue of Alexander the Great on his horse. They are worshipping him. It's their hero, national pride. He massacred populations, whole cities. And in the past, they did that very efficiently and very rigorously. They didn't only kill the soldiers, they killed everything and everybody, including animals, children, women. Everything needed to be wiped out so that they could start with a clean slate, and that later there were no people taking revenge. Past was very cruel. Genghis Khan. Go to Mongolia, get out of the airport, Ulaanbaatar. There's a huge statue of Genghis Khan. It's their national identity. Many boys have the name Genghis, not only in Mongolia, all over the Balkan, Turkey, what have you. Genghis Khan, through DNA, scientists have found out that about, I don't know the exact number, it should be easy to find through Google search, but about 0.5% of all Asian people have his DNA. What does that mean? What does that mean? He raped women on an industrial scale, every day, probably, everywhere he went. He raped women, made them pregnant. The 1 in every 200 people have his DNA. If you think of it, if you rationalize it, you realize how shocking it is. And apart from that, I think all those power people engage in this kind of conduct, this kind of behavior, raping women, just taking whatever they want. But Genghis Khan also massacred huge amounts of people, wiping out entire villages and cities and whatever he conquered. Well, we see those people as heroes. And if you look closer, you can apply this to practically all the heroes that are being worshipped around the world. More recent, we have to go into politics, whether you agree with me or not, but half the population of the United States worships Trump still. It's almost an obsession. And those people are not listening to reason. They do not want to see the truth of the chaos that he created, of the lies that he told, the deception. Same category. There are many things have happened in the past 6 years, 5 years, that you may not see a direct link, but that are basically caused by his behavior. And that has affected billions of people around the world, not only in the United States, around the world. There are people, this is speculation, but there are people who speculate that you know that Trump was putting on the screws on China, increasing import taxes on Chinese products. China had the feeling that they were put under pressure, that China was rising, and Trump and his cronies tried to oppress China. There are people who speculate that China released the coronavirus under the idea that if we are not allowed to thrive, then the rest should also suffer. I find that a very credible it's something that you should be very careful saying, of course. But in diplomatic circles, there are many people who know things that cannot be supported by concrete proof. They know more than we do, and you sometimes hear something leaking. If you read between the lines, you can pick up on those things. In the end, it is Trump that triggered these kind of things. Iran had an agreement with NATO, the Western world, with America, to not build nuclear bombs. Trump pulled out of that agreement. You know what happened? Like crazy, they developed their nuclear industry as a result, which would never have happened if Trump had not pulled out of that agreement. Well, why did he pull out? Not to make a new agreement, because he didn't. There are all kind of nefarious, all kind of impure motivations behind that have harmed the world tremendously. And those kind of people do not care. And that is why we can put the stamp of evil upon them. Afghanistan, another issue. Just before Trump stepped down from the presidency, he quickly made an agreement with the Taliban to withdraw all American soldiers. Biden had no choice. but to withdraw them. Otherwise, all the soldiers that were still there would have been killed by the Taliban. The Taliban would have gone to war with those because they had an agreement. Trump set up a booby trap just to sabotage Biden, just for the heck of it. Not for any good policy reason or to do something constructive, but just to sabotage the one that came after him. And many people, the whole population of Afghanistan is now suffering because of that. Because the Taliban do not know how to govern. They only know how to fight. So the banks don't function anymore. Girls are not allowed to go to school anymore. People are hungry. More than half the population is suffering hunger now. And you can all put that on the bill of Mr. Trump. Anyway, should not go into politics, and I did it again. Taking the non-Atman for Atman. Atman is your soul consciousness, your heart's content. So it's a little bit taking the impure for pure. You follow your heart and you decide to do certain things in life as a result of that, deviating from what is expected. But sometimes, or not sometimes, we have this dilemma which we call the battle between the head and the heart. And the Bhagavad Gita is a huge book, an epic book, that is solely about the subject of the battle between the head and the heart. Atman is the heart. The head, that is your rational thinking. Why are there such huge literary books written about the head and the heart? Because it's very difficult to distinguish between the voice of the head and the heart. Even for yogis like us, having increasing sensitivity and consciousness and developing a connection, soul connection, we still find often that we are not sure. Is this the voice of my heart speaking, or is my head spoiling the process again? And the head, of course, is, for a large part, is fueled by fear. The voice of the head is speaking based on lower emotions and desires, and the strongest of those is fear. Taking the non-Atman for Atman is believing that something that you decide, something that you pursue, is based on your destiny, your heart's content, is meant to be. But then on closer look, it is in fact something that is based on lower emotions and desires. Taking the non-Atman for Atman. How do you deal with all this? Perfection doesn't exist. Simply live your life, but from now on, as a yogi, being mindful. The alertness of the deer in the heart chakra. It's very important that we stay alert in daily life. You will notice that that is not a luxury, but becomes an important aspect of how we function. Because every time when we are not mindful, every time when we are not alert, mistakes happen. We get hit by misery because we were temporarily blinded, or we were temporarily ignorant. So we must stay awake, we must stay alert in everyday situations. When we make mistakes, do not beat yourself over the head, simply learn from it. and improve as a result. It is a dynamic process, and perfection simply doesn't exist. That is how you deal with the battle between the head and the heart, the dilemma. Am I following my heart, actually? Or is it my head deceiving me? If you don't know, try it out. Try it out and go by trial and error. If it fails, it clearly was not from the heart. If it goes smooth and starts making sense and succeeds, then you were right, that it was indeed from the heart. And when you fail, do not feel bad about the failure. See it as an opportunity to learn. And doing this time and time again, you also become more skillful at distinguishing between the feeling from the heart and the thought from the head. I remember myself 30 years ago learning about this, finding it very difficult to grasp. And now for me it's just so evident, so natural to function based on this. And it's only possible by living life as a normal human being on a daily basis, but with an extra quality, the quality of alertness. Allowing yourself to make mistakes and learn from them and grow as a result. That's how you deal with these kind of things. Perfection does not exist. Do not pursue it. It just makes you tired and feel like a failure, because it just doesn't exist. It's a very dynamic process. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The 1 step back is failure that needs to happen to allow you to make the next 2 steps forward. Without 1 step back, you don't learn, you don't grow. So you move, you grow, you develop, something goes wrong. Sooner or later, something goes wrong. It's part of the process. Next time when something goes wrong, do not feel bad about it. See it as a necessary element that will allow you to make the next 2 steps forward. That's how it works. It will save you a lot of agony, a lot of suffering over the feeling that you have failed miserably over something. Failure is not a bad thing. Of course, sometimes it can affect us in a bad way, in a negative way, but even then we must draw conclusions from it. We must learn from it so that we learn, that we grow, that we can move forward as a result. Anyway, that's a theme that will come back again and again. Questions? Okay, let's have a short break.